All right, let's head over to the Zoom line where Jess Mazour is joining us. She's down in Iowa. I'm at my remote studio. As you can see, I got my Regeneration X stuff here, as well as my Pinky and the Brain shirt. Jess, have you ever seen Pinky and the Brain? Do you remember that show?
I remember it, but I mean, it's been a long time.
Yeah, my guess is you were probably a little bit younger when that came out for sure.
Yeah.
But thanks for joining us today. Say the reason we wanted to have you on was you're down in Iowa. We're up here in North Dakota, Minnesota, South Dakota, and there's a carbon pipeline that's going through 5 states. I think Nebraska's involved as well. 50, I lost track after 50 some ethanol plants are going to be piping carbon dioxide, CO2 to North Dakota into a giant cavity, if you will, where the Public Service Commissioner, Julie Fedorchak, owns part of the property that it's underneath, as well as a few others. So there's been some different politics involved with this pipeline, and it's just one of the bigger stories for me with this pipeline is not so much the public-private partnerships or the Green New Deal or the Inflation Act or the water being used or even the end result, what they're trying to do. To me, the bigger story is that you literally have people from the NRA and people from the Sierra Club joining forces almost to educate people on this pipeline, and it's gotten very contentious. Down in Iowa, what is your background? Who are you representing, and what is happening down there? Because you were one of the lead people that just spoke last week. It was a Butler County, was that correct?
Guthrie County.
Guthrie County. Okay. Talk to me a little bit about your involvement, how you got involved, and what you spoke about last week at the county meeting where over like 200 people showed up. It was a great showing for education.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me on. I work for the Sierra Club Iowa chapter, and for the last 3 years, we have been working to stop these pipelines. We found out about it probably in July of 2020 when Iowa created the Carbon Sequestration Task Force. And we're like, what is that? And so shortly after Summit announced their project, and back in 2016, we fought the Dakota Access Pipeline. So we've gone through this hazardous liquid pipeline process in Iowa before, and we learned a lot about what worked and what didn't work. And we did not win that fight. The Dakota Access Pipeline is in the ground, but we had a lot of information and we knew how valuable it is. If you want to stop a pipeline, you really need landowners in Iowa because of how the process works. So that's what we kicked it off with, was trying to meet as many impacted landowners as possible. And, we were still learning what a carbon pipeline was at that point. So it was a very steep learning curve. And, it took off. We had 10 people who were very concerned and opposed, and that quickly grew to 20 to 25 to 40 to now we have thousands of landowners who are opposed, and hundreds of those landowners have hired the same attorney. And we've been going through the last 3 years fighting it. And now Summit has announced a phase 2 expansion. And so that's what these recent meetings that we're holding is. We're trying to kind of start that process over again, meet those newly impacted landowners, and start from, square one. Is what is the carbon pipeline? Why are they doing this? Why is it bad? And how do we stop them? And so that's what we focused on in Guthrie County. We had another meeting last night in Greene County, and we had over 75 people there. And we've got 3 more of these meetings coming up. And hopefully we'll have trained, hundreds and hundreds of new Iowans that can then prepare themselves to go to the Iowa Utilities Commission meetings. And that's when the process really kicks off. And we're going to have hundreds of people there to push back on Summit and to show the IUC that we don't want Summit here in Iowa.
And what was the other county? I didn't have time to write that down that you were at last night.
That was Greene County.
Greene. Okay. And so what's interesting about this for me was so I do another brand called The Crude Life. So, we don't hide what we are. So we try to educate. We're non-political. And I came from the media world, and because the Bakken was in our backyard, I started covering it. We do a weekly radio show and a number of different things. We stayed out of the politics. And when the Dakota Access Pipeline happened, we had all sides on. So we had We had people fighting the pipeline. We had people for the pipeline. I was on the BBC because they called me the most trusted person in North Dakota for the actual pipeline, which was a compliment for me because I try to approach most things from a journalistic point of view. And there are a lot of people that were in favor of the Dakota Access Pipeline that are now fighting this pipeline. That's the part that is so unusual. And I talked to State Senator Jeff Magrum, and I just asked him point blank because he said North Dakota is a friendly pipeline state. I said, well, what's the biggest problem? Is it just the way the company is behaving? And yeah, that's about what it came down to, was that one of the biggest complaints was the behavior of Summit, the ramrodding or the rush to get this thing done. And at the end of the day, what I guess that ilk of a political leaning, their biggest concern is property rights. That's their number one concern. You mentioned you're with the Sierra Club. Now, I've never attributed Sierra Club and property rights together. So what is your big, and maybe it is, but what is the Sierra Club's biggest concern with this pipeline?
We have a number of concerns, and property rights is definitely one of those. But we always kind of boil it down to the 5 things that we hear the most from different people on the pipeline route. And the first one, being property rights, is just eminent domain should not be used for private gain, plain and simple. That's an easy one that, almost everyone can agree on. But we're also really concerned about the land destruction. So we've never had a pipeline of that magnitude come into Iowa until Dakota Access, and we learned a lot. Our soil is what makes Iowa a great agricultural state, and Dakota Access did not treat our soils very well. We have massive scars across the land. We have decreased crop production. We have tile lines that are broken. And so I think that's one of the reasons we're seeing so much opposition, even from people who supported Dakota Access, was we now know what that kind of construction does to our land. So land destruction is a huge one. We also are really concerned that the public's paying for this travesty. We are paying more than Summit's upfront infrastructure costs through the 45Q federal tax credits. And so that's a major concern. It's a misuse of public money, and that money could be better spent if it's earmarked for climate change mitigations. It should be better spent on other solutions. And then we also know in the environmental world as well, we know that this is not a solution to climate change because 1, it doesn't meet the goals that it's stated. 2, if it's used for enhanced oil recovery, it's not a good thing for our climate or our environment. And then the big one that we've just really uncovered in the past few months is just how much water it's going to need. And that's a huge reason that Sierra Club is concerned. And then lastly, these are just dangerous. These pipelines are not like oil pipelines or water pipelines or natural gas pipelines. They're under immense pressure. CO2 in that concentration and that quantity is deadly. And so I think that's what we're seeing this united coalition form around, is because any of those reasons you're bound to agree with, if not all of them, most of them. And, even though they say that we have so many differences between the left and the right, what we have in common is that we love our land, we love our families, and we love our communities. And if we can start there, we can work together and stop the pipelines.
That's another part of this that I find interesting, is it is bringing both sides together, because that's the way democracy was supposed to be, is that you were supposed to agree on the end goal. It's just, how do you get there? Like a lot of libertarians, Republicans, they were more of government, stay out of my life, our families and our faith will take care of it, etc. And whereas like Democrats were, no, the state is what's best because there's too much corruption, there's too much greed, too many different things. So I always told people that, yeah, we're all going to Las Vegas. It's just, how do we get there? And we take different routes, but we all want to be on the same page. It doesn't seem like everybody is on the same page when it comes with the group that's come together to fight this versus like a Summit, for example, because there's so many people in government that are involved with this pipeline from a monetary point of view. The governor of North Dakota, he's rumored to be an investor. Our public service commissioner in North Dakota, she's going to benefit immensely, to where she had to actually recuse herself from it. We're finding out there's zoning members involved that are going to profit. There's been a lot of question about who owns it. There's been emails dating back to 2018 and 19 to where the state of North Dakota might have been the one that kind of put all these players together. And so when you have the government acting like that, and a big company that's never built a pipeline before, and it's going to be the largest pipeline, and they're going to have an 85Q, because remember, the 45Q went up to an 85Q, I think it is now. And we should point out that President Trump was the one that signed it initially, and President Biden is the one who increased it. So we've got a lot of different transparency issues here. To me, that is another large part of the story, is that there's been a giant chasm and lack of transparency from our elected officials. And I don't care if you're part of the NRA, you're part of the Free Soil Coalition, you're part of the Sierra Club. Everybody wants transparency from their elected officials. How are you guys handling the transparency part?
Well, we're in the same boat as you, struggling to get any transparency, whether it's from Summit or from our elected officials. We want to know who the investors are, plain and simple, because then we know, who should be recusing themselves, who we should be trusting and not. And, we don't simply know that. We know that we have our governor, who appears to be doing the bidding for Summit. And we definitely have tracked some campaign contributions from Bruce Rassetter to the governor and other elected officials in the state. But we also have the governor who's appointing members to our Iowa Utilities Commission, and we have a Senate that won't pass our bills. So we need a lot of transparency from our elected officials, but also from Summit. And that's where we have been pushing really hard to get things like the plume modeling and the emergency response plan. We want to get the landowner list so that people can communicate with each other, and we can make sure that they did a good job gathering addresses and doing their due diligence of notifying people properly. And we can't get any of that out of Summit. And if there's secrecy around a project, if you are not willing to say who your investors are, what the dangers are, if you're not willing to say that, you're hiding something. And that's a huge red flag that this is not good for us. And, businesses that are proud of what they're doing aren't secretive.
You mentioned the governor has ties to this. I didn't realize, or I forgot, that the Iowa Utility Board is appointed. In North Dakota, it's an elected position. So that's important to point out. It is an appointed.
Well, and on the IUC appointments, so we had a 3-member board, and about a year into the process, one of the members retired, and so they replaced him, and that new person took over as chair. And so the person who was chair was mad and resigned. So we had 2 new appointments midway through the process that Governor Reynolds got to pick. And just the whole process of how it happened was just really, it just screamed corruption, because they removed the acting chair to put in a brand new person who was very questionable. And so it's been a travesty to see our elected leaders and our appointed leaders, put these pipelines and their big money ahead of the people and our safety in our communities.
What's the name of the governor in Iowa again?
Governor Kim Reynolds.
Kim Reynolds. Now, her husband,
former Governor Branstad, works for Summit. He's one of the strategic advisors for Summit.
And what was his name?
Governor Terry Branstad. And he was our longest serving governor, and just left right before Kim Reynolds. And
my understanding is, and I think if I have my notes correctly, Kim Reynolds' husband is going to benefit from this as well through a technology company out of Washington, state of Washington.
If I would love to see if that's the case. I have not heard of that, but that would not surprise me one bit if there are ties between family members or herself, or anyone that's sitting on the boards of these ethanol plants. They're also people that we're kind of looking at as, are they investors? Are they people who stand to benefit?
Well, it's a little different. I mean, you have there's a North Korean company, I believe, or South Korean company that's an investor. China is an investor in this. John Deere, the TP Rise, which is owned mostly by China. And Bono, I think, is even a member of that as well, which is kind of interesting. But you've got just it's a global company. It's a global company, and it certainly smacks as kind of the new normal for government, to where it's almost like a lot of these governments are now putting companies together or picking and choosing companies, and then they're becoming investors in it. And it's happening more and more and more. Do you have any solutions? Is the Sierra Club offering any solutions, or are you just kind of in the listening phase because a lot of people are just finding out about this?
Yeah.
And it is absolutely remarkable. State Senator Jeff Magrum out of North Dakota, it was his neighbor that informed him about it. And it's like right next to us, like 500 feet from his property. And he showed up and he was like, whoa, what's going on here? And so in Southeast North Dakota, there were people that were signing the letters with Summit, and they didn't want to. They felt threatened. They felt they got strong armed into it. And now this one senator is having to represent people from all over the state because one landowner I talked to, she was going to come on the program and talk a little bit. She had to cancel because her business now is being threatened by Summit. So they have to decide, do we lose our land or do we lose our business? That is some ruthless behavior. Absolutely ruthless.
Absolutely.
Is that happening in Iowa?
Oh yeah, they're doing lots of ruthless things all across the state, but we're making sure people know exactly what they can do to plug in, not just sitting on the sidelines watching it. We're holding meetings. We hold weekly Zoom meetings just to give action steps and updates to landowners every week. We've got 11 counties that have teamed up and hired an attorney so that the counties can join the fight as well. We've got hundreds of landowners who've teamed up and all hired Brian Jordy with Domino Law Group. And so we're fighting legally on the landowner front. And then we also have over 20 state representatives and senators who have teamed up, and one of them is a lawyer. And so they're fighting it with an appeal. We've been up at the Capitol every single week for the last 4 legislative sessions. We've been engaging with PHMSA. And so that's, there's so many different things we can do. It's trying to pick, a manageable number of things to do each week to spread out the workload. But yeah, we're definitely seeing the corruption, but we're also seeing this incredible drive and energy from people all across the state who are, this is really kind of that trigger issue that's getting people involved and saying, not in our backyard, not in my county, not on my neighbor's land, not on my land. And I think that's really exciting is there's lots of times when people have to rise up and fight stuff or fight to pass something, but then every once in a while there's those movement moments where it's just an energy that is, it's contagious. And I think that's what we're seeing across the state right now.
Sometimes you have to be a lion to live like a lamb, and people who are kind of ruthless, they don't like it when the lambs become lions because they're not used to it. They don't know how to deal with that. And it is interesting to see what are the triggers for each person. Like I said, property rights. For some people, it's the carbon capturing, it's the climate change, it's the water rights. There are so many serious issues. I mean, serious. These are really serious. And we've got people that are in back rooms and boardrooms making decisions for other people's property. We interviewed one landowner live on the air. He got his Summit whatever model, and he found out live on the air that his shop, the pipeline was going right through it. So here he just got done building that shop. And basically he was going to have to rip it down now because they were going to come in and eminent domain it. That's a serious issue.
Yeah.
In Minnesota, which is only have one, is there one or two? I think there's only one. There's only a couple in Minnesota ethanol plants connecting to this.
Yeah, and it's a weird route because they don't have like a direct line through Minnesota. There's like a from Iowa up to Minnesota, and then I think there's a line from North Dakota over in Minnesota, but those two don't connect. So they have like 2 separate sections.
So I'm going to read to you this more. And by the way, Jess Mazour is our guest. She's with the Sierra Club, and we're talking about the Summit Carbon Solutions pipeline, which is being fought against. Landowners are fighting it. The Sierra Club is fighting it. You've got, like I said, members from the NRA coming out and fighting this thing, property rights people. So it's a real cast of characters that are coming together to fight this. And this morning, a 394-page environmental impact statement filing to the Minnesota PUC and Department of Commerce came out. Public comments are open until September 11th, 2024. And here is kind of what some of the notes were, that the environmental impacts from the carbon capture of 0.19 million metric tons of CO2 per annum is one ethanol plant. It's the one in Fergus Falls. And that's quite a bit. So you're talking about 13 million gallons of water per year. And the other issue is 38.5 million kilowatt hours of electricity. We haven't even talked about the electricity that's going to be needed. Now they're looking at putting data centers in. They're putting all these other just sucks of the grid on there. So if these carbon sequestration lines come in there to suck energy too, have you looked into the energy or the water part of this?
We've looked into the water extensively. We put out a water report, and it's called Water Woes, the True Cost of Summit's Carbon Pipeline. And you can find that on the Sierra Club Iowa chapter website. Summit's 31 ethanol plants in Iowa will need 3.36 billion gallons of water annually just for the CCS equipment. And if you add the CCS equipment water needs with those 31 ethanol plants water needs just to make the ethanol, it's 13.5 billion gallons of water annually. And the scariest part about it is that water is not coming from our alluvial aquifers, which are like rivers or shallow aquifers and other water sources that recharge easily with rain. This is coming from our deep bedrock aquifers, and the water down there is thousands and thousands of years old, and it does not recharge quickly with rain. It will not recharge in our lifetimes if we drain it. And Iowa has never done a comprehensive study of how much water is down there, how much is left, how much have we used, and how quickly are we pumping it out. And we cannot allow companies like Summit to threaten the water that's supposed to be there for future generations. And not only do they threaten to, use the water and waste the water and empty our aquifers, if anything goes wrong with this process and that CO2 makes it to our aquifers, whether that's in Iowa or whether that's in North Dakota where it's being stored underground, liquefied CO2 and water make carbonic acid. We will acidify our drinking water sources. And that's terrifying. So yeah, a lot is at stake. And then in the energy front, we have slightly broached that because we know it's a big issue. But we're only kind of able to do one thing at a time. But that's something that is a huge concern that we need more people looking into, is what's going to happen if they need more electricity than what in Iowa, it's a lot of our local rural electric cooperatives, not big facilities. Who's going to pay for the cost if those systems need upgraded? Who foots the bill? Is it going to be all of the other ratepayers? So I think we need to take a hard look at not just the water, but the energy consumption as well.
For me, it's different because I'm literally like 3 miles from this ethanol plant in Minnesota that's going to be part of it. So I'm paying attention to it from a realistic point of view, from the water. I moved where I'm at because of the river. I literally moved here because of the Pelican River. And carbon dioxide, that is not anything to mess around with. I mean, there's actual theories that's what's wiped out the dinosaurs. I mean, you took out the whole dinosaurs by carbon in some theories. So there are, and of course there's Sartell. Is it Sartell, Mississippi? Was that the name of the place?
Oh, Satartia.
Thank you. Yes, there were some issues down there. And so it is quite real. The other question I had for you is, in South Dakota, there was a land surveyor that was looking in windows of private landowners, and a woman just got out of the shower. And so when you think of these types of tactics, and we think of just the entitlement involved here, I've said this from after the first month, I said, this seems a lot like Ocean's 12. Like they've already stole the egg and they're just kind of going through the process, because the way a lot of these people are acting, the way they're throwing out eminent domain, looking in people's windows, trespassing on people's land, and they have no fear. They have no fear about it at all.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to comment on the Ocean's 12 thing, to where it just seems like a deal's already been done in the back room and they literally are going through the motions. You can see it on the county commissioners and some of the public officials, to where they're just biding time. It's like
Mm.
in Goodfellas when the guy gets busted and he's on trial. And after he's done, he's like, "Hey, you did a good job. You didn't rat us out. Go home. You'll have a second level on your house. Good for you, kid." It seems
Yeah.
a lot like that, to where this is already a foregone conclusion.
Yeah, I definitely think that the people who were pushing this got a lot of support before it was announced publicly, and false support, just, with false talking points. And some of those people, like our Senate Majority Leader, Senator Whitver, or Senator Brown, or some people that are high up in the Senate, are, digging their feet in and doing the bidding for the governor and Bruce Rastetter and Summit. But then we're also seeing some that I think were kind of like, holy crap, I did not expect this level of opposition, and I'm not willing to lose my seat. So they, cower in the corner and pretend to be on our side, but do nothing to help us. So it's very interesting to see what this level of power that we're building can actually accomplish, because we're definitely holding some people's feet to the fire. Senator Brown, that I mentioned, who's been one of our biggest enemies up in the Senate, actually resigned a few weeks ago. I think just doesn't want to deal with our pressure anymore. But yeah, it's massive corruption. We have a lot of people who were brought in early and likely asked to be investors, and so we've got a big challenge ahead of us. But they might have more money, but we've got more people.
Jess Mazour, Sierra Club. I know you got to get going, but I like to end with what's next. What do you want people to do? What are you asking people to do? And when are your next meetings?
So we have upcoming meetings in Hardin and Hamilton County on August 12th, so this coming Monday. And these are all available on the Sierra Club website if anyone wants to find them. We have Floyd, Mitchell, and Worth counties on the 13th. Then we have Palo Alto, Clay County on the 20th. And then for anyone else that's not in those areas, but wants to get involved, going to the Iowa Utilities Commission website and submitting an objection to these carbon pipelines would be incredibly helpful. The more objections we get, help build our case against the project. And that's, again, on the Iowa Utilities Commission website. They have an electronic filing system, and you just have to find the Summit pipeline, just type in Summit, and it should pop right up and file an objection.
Well, I appreciate the time today. Like I said, I know you got to get running here. And if you have anything in the future, feel free to lean on us. I appreciate the information today, because people do need to be educated on this and understand that this is being presented in a very one-sided way. And the people who are opposing have got to do an enormous amount of work. Like, I've never, in my 30 years in the media, I've never, ever seen anything like this. Never. So
Yeah, it's
anyway,
incredible. And that's why I think we're going to win.